They pushed him back like he was a nobody, just an old man in wrinkled clothes, while VIPs in suits walked past to attend the funeral of a general he once saved with his own hands. No one knew his name. No one cared. Until a 4-star general slammed his convoy to a halt, pointed at the gate, and shouted, "Open that gate!" He wrote the rules you're following. What happened next shook the military, woke a nation, and reopened a door that had been closed on veterans for far too long. This isn't just a story about a funeral. It's a story about dignity memory, and the man who forced the world to remember. That day, they shoved me. Not hard, but enough that I stumbled cane trembling in my old fingers as my shoe caught on the marble step of Arlington's South Gate. "Sir, this event is restricted," the young guard barked, his mirrored sunglasses flashing the early sun. "Veterans must be pre-approved. And, frankly, we don't see your name on the list." The man behind him, a funeral director in black with a glossy clipboard, didn't even flinch. Just tilted his chin and muttered, "Move him along." I could still feel the tremble in my knees. Not from weakness, from rage. I had been to 24 funerals here. Buried comrades, folded flags, whispered final prayers. But today they blocked me. Because this time, this funeral was different. Because this time, I wasn't just mourning a soldier, I was mourning my brother. My name is Elijah Brooks. I'm 87 years old, a retired sergeant major, and a forgotten shadow in a country I bled for. I live alone in a rusted trailer off Route 11 in Virginia. I don't make noise. I don't ask for pity. My uniform is stored in a sealed trunk, my medals tucked away in a coffee tin. Most days, my only companion is the memory of gunfire thick in the air, like molasses in Nam, in Fallujah in Panama. I didn't plan on speaking at the funeral. That wasn't my way. But when they told me General Walter Shepard had died, my closest war brother, the man who once dragged me through fire when I'd lost a leg and a prayer, I knew I had to go. Had to stand, if only for a moment, to salute him one last time. I shaved for the first time in 2 weeks, polished my cane, ironed my single white shirt. And I made the journey to Arlington alone. I thought honor would be enough to get me through that gate. I was wrong. "You can't stand here, sir. Please, step back," the guard repeated, but his voice wasn't harsh anymore. It was rehearsed. Like he'd said it to so many men like me, his words had gone numb. The clipboard man whispered again. "If we let in every old vet who shows up, there'd be no room for the guests who matter." And that's when I saw it. The van with tinted windows. The suits stepping out. The people who mattered. All in tailored clothes. Gold pins. iPads. Not one of them smelled like gun oil or dirt. Not one of them had the hollow eyes of someone who'd watched their best friend die next to them in a jungle. I took a deep breath, my mouth dry. "Young man," I said softly to the guard, "I don't want to make a scene. I served with General Shepard. I held him in my arms once when he was bleeding. I carried his mother's photo back from the crash. He told me, if he ever passed before me, I should come. I'm not asking for favors. I just want 5 minutes." He didn't respond. Instead, the clipboard man turned to me and said flatly, "Then maybe he should have left you an invitation." I don't know what happened next, but someone behind me gasped. A black SUV skidded to a halt on the curb. Another, then a third, and then I heard it boots hitting pavement. 20 soldiers, full uniform, a convoy, led by a man so tall, so sharp he didn't walk. He marched. Stars glinted from his shoulder. A 4-star general. The entire funeral paused. as the man stormed toward us. Guards stiffened. The clipboard man paled. Who blocked this man? The general's voice boomed, slicing the silence like a blade. Everyone turned. I stood frozen. That voice, I hadn't heard it in years. But I knew it. It was General Marcus Halley, Walter's godson, my old cadet. He looked at me. And then, with the rage of 1,000 rifles, he turned to the gate and shouted, "Open the gate. This man doesn't need an invitation." He wrote the damn rules the rest of us follow. General Halley's voice cracked like thunder over the sacred silence of Arlington. You could hear the wind shift. Even the birds froze in their trees as if they knew something had shifted not in the air, but in history. I stood there, trembling, not from age, not from exhaustion, but because I had just been dragged from humiliation into honor in the span of one heartbeat. The gate creaked open, but the weight that lifted off me was older than this uniform. It was the weight of invisibility. The weight every old soldier carries when the wars end, but the battle to be seen begins. The guard who had stopped me stepped back in silence. He couldn't meet my eyes, and that clipboard man, the one with the smug voice and shiny shoes, faded behind a column like a shadow ashamed of its own shape. General Halley stepped forward. No fanfare, no politics, just a man with fury in his chest and respect in his stride. He came straight to me and saluted, crisp, full, as if I was the one wearing the stars. "Sergeant Major Brooks," he said. "My godfather told me about you my whole life. You carried him out of hell more than once. Today, let us carry you." I tried to respond, but my voice caught in my throat thick with memory. My fingers trembled as I returned the salute. And then something even stranger happened. The entire convoy of soldiers behind him, 6, then 12, then every last one of them turned toward me in formation and saluted. The funeral procession paused. Heads turned. Mourners removed sunglasses. A senator whispered, "Who is that man?" They didn't recognize me, but Walter would have, and that was all that mattered. We walked slowly, my cane tapping the marble rhythmically as General Halley offered his arm. I tried to refuse. "I still have one leg and a bit of pride left," I joked. He chuckled. "You've got more than pride, Sergeant Major. You've got legacy." Rows of chairs waited under the canopy by the casket. The first 2 rows were already filled with VIPs, generals, old brass congressmen. But when I arrived, Halley didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the front row, tapped a major on the shoulder, and said, "Excuse me, you're in his seat." The man stood without a word. No one questioned it. I sat, knees, cracking breath, shallow heart, heavier than ever. And then the casket was brought out, draped in a perfect flag. I could still smell jungle mud blood and the iron scent of fear from the day I first thought I'd lose Walter. But now here he was again, quiet, still, at peace. And I wasn't supposed to be here. The ceremony began. They read his accolades, his medals, his victories. But none of that mattered more than the small, grainy photo tucked under my coat. It was from 1967. Walter and I covered in mud, grinning like idiots in front of a wrecked Jeep. No rank, no titles. Just brothers in a war the world tried to forget. I whispered into the wind I kept my promise, Walt. Then a voice behind me said, "That photo, is that from Da Nang?" I turned. An old man, Colonel Jaspers, whom I hadn't seen since '83, leaned forward. "I was on the next patrol after yours. We found the Jeep. I heard the stories about what you did. Suddenly, others chimed in. A nurse who'd treated me in '91. A retired Marine I once pulled from a collapsed bunker. Even a junior officer I trained during Reagan's first term. One by one, they gathered near. Sergeant Major Brooks. Someone said we owe you more than just a seat. And then, after the 21-gun salute, the flag was folded and handed to General Halley. He walked over, but instead of giving it to Walter's next of kin, he bent down on one knee in front of me. I know he'd want you to have this, Halley said softly. I froze. No, that belongs to his family. Halley shook his head. He said you were his family. He placed the folded flag in my lap. My fingers touched the cloth, soft as silk but heavy like lead. I couldn't hold back the tears any more. They came quiet, clean proud. Later, as people began to leave a woman in pearls, some dignitary or diplomat's wife approached me. Why did they stop you at the gate? She asked, incredulous. I looked up at her steady now. Because I didn't come with a title. I came with memory. By sunset, I stood alone by the grave. The convoy had left. The chairs folded. But I remained. I traced Walter's name on the headstone. Rest well, old friend, I said. I made it in, and in the distance a bugle cried, taps soft, trembling eternal. But in my chest something stirred that hadn't moved in years. Dignity. The next morning I woke before dawn. No alarm, no birdsong, just instinct, something carved deep into my bones by decades of reveille and roll calls. But this morning felt heavier. The folded flag sat on the small table beside my bed, right where I'd placed it the night before. It stared at me like a silent reminder. You were seen yesterday. But what about today? Outside fog clung to the blue hills of Virginia. My trailer groaned as it warmed under the sun's touch. I made a pot of black coffee pulled on my faded army sweatshirt and sat at the edge of my porch with a notebook I hadn't opened in years. The headline was already written, What Happens to Soldiers? When the world moves on, I began to write. Not for fame, not for revenge, but because something had shifted inside me. For the first time in decades, I realized the fight wasn't over. Not the war, not the loss, but the fight to remind people that veterans aren't statues in cemeteries or names on marble. We breathe, we hurt, we remember, and too often we're ignored. Around midday, a knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find a young man, late 20s, maybe 30, wearing a civilian jacket over what looked like a ROTC shirt. Mr. Brooks, he asked. Sergeant Major Brooks. That's me. Who wants to know? He straightened, nervous, respectful. My name's Alan Whitmore. I was at the funeral yesterday. I was one of the ushers. He paused, shifting his weight. I didn't know who you were, and I let them stop you at the gate. I watched his hands shake. He wasn't one of the ones who shoved me, but he was there. He stood by. I didn't do anything. I didn't speak up. He said quietly. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I nodded. That takes guts, son. Most people wouldn't have come. Alan looked away. I've been reading about you all night. The things you did in country, the units you trained. I couldn't believe no one recognized you. I chuckled dry as the leaves rustling nearby. That's the thing, son. They don't want to recognize us. We're inconvenient reminders of the cost of peace. He stayed for coffee. We talked for hours about war, about memory, about the strange way a man can feel most alive in battle and most forgotten in peacetime. But something he said struck me hardest. You should tell your story, he said. The way you speak, it's powerful. People need to hear it. I stared at the steam rising from my mug. I tried once. A newspaper passed. Said, "No one cares about the old wars anymore." Alan frowned. "Then they're wrong." And before he left, he handed me a card. "I work for a podcast network now. We tell real stories. If you're willing, I'd be honored to record yours." That night, I sat at my desk and dusted off a shoebox full of photos, letters, medals. Some stained with age, others with tears. One by one, I laid them out. Not just to remember, but to reclaim them. I picked up the photo from 67 again, the one of Walter and me. I turned it over. There, in his chicken-scratch handwriting, were words I hadn't noticed before. "If I go first, don't let them forget. Tell them we were more than soldiers." I called Alan the next day. I said yes. 2 weeks later, we sat in a tiny recording studio. A single mic. Dim light. Just me and a room built for echoes. I told him everything. The jungles. The fire. The time Walter and I buried a child because the parents had died in crossfire. And how we built a swing set in her village when we returned years later. I talked about the times we cried when no one was looking. The laughs that saved our sanity. And the silence that came after the medals stopped arriving. When I was done, Alan didn't speak. He just nodded, eyes glassy, and said, "The world needs to hear this." 3 days later, the episode aired. Title: The Soldier at the Gate. By noon, it had 40,000 downloads. By the next morning, 500,000. Veterans from across the country wrote in. Sons of lost soldiers. Daughters of forgotten warriors. Even strangers who'd never served. "Thank you for reminding me what service looks like," one comment read. "Your voice brought back my father's stories," said another. But one message from an email with no name simply said, "They tried to keep you out. You let us all in." And just like that, I was no longer invisible. 2 weeks after the podcast went live, I received more mail than I had in 10 years. Not bills, not government forms. Letters, some typed, some handwritten in shaky cursive, some just smudged postcards. But all of them carried the same thing memory. "Dear Sergeant Major Brooks," one began. "My grandfather never spoke of the war, but after listening to your story, I finally understood why. Thank you for giving him a voice." Another said, "They denied you a seat at a funeral, but gave us a seat at the table of truth." One came from a woman who'd never known her father. She enclosed a photograph of a young man in uniform. It was labeled Bravo Company, 1968. I recognized the face. I'd held his hand when he died. I wept for the first time in years, but it wasn't sadness. It was recognition. We were never asking for pity. We were asking to be seen. I began responding to each letter by hand. Even when my fingers cramped and my eyes blurred, I kept writing. These weren't fan mails, they were testaments. Cries from men and women who had buried their pain in silence, waiting for anyone to break it open. And now somehow, I had become that someone. Alan called me every day with updates. "The story's gone viral, sir," he said, excitement bubbling through the phone. Even the Pentagon reached out. "They want to do a veteran spotlight series now, all because of you." I laughed. "Careful now. If they dig too deep, they'll find out I once stole a colonel's jeep for a beer run." Alan chuckled. "They already know. They loved that part." But not everyone was pleased. One afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the dirt road that led to my trailer. 2 men stepped out, civilian suits, buzz cuts, straight postures. "Mr. Brooks," one said, flipping a badge. We're from the Department of Defense Media Relations. Mind if we talk? I nodded, invited them in, poured coffee, but they weren't here for caffeine. We appreciate your service. We appreciate the story you told the taller one began. But there's concern. Concern, I asked, leaning back. Yes. About how certain parts might reflect poorly on operations, on command figures who can't respond. I stared at them, dead in the eye. Tell me something, son. You ever pull a 16-year-old's body from a rice paddy because some command figure didn't check their coordinates? The room went quiet. You can't censor the truth just because it's inconvenient, I said. We didn't fight so you could whitewash the war. We fought so people could speak. They left tight-lipped. I didn't hear from them again, but that night I slept better than I had in months. The podcast had started a movement. Veterans began gathering in towns across the country library, basements, school gyms, VFW halls. They shared stories. They brought photos. Some brought ashes, and they named it the Gatekeepers. Named after the gate I was blocked from. Named for the stories we'd been kept from telling. One night, Alan called again. There's going to be a memorial event, he said. In D.C., full honor, broadcast. They want you to speak. I paused. I'm not the kind for speeches. Yes, sir, he replied. But maybe that's why you should be the one to do it. The Capitol lawn was packed. Thousands in attendance. More watching online. Reporters, flags, choirs. A massive granite wall behind the stage, still blank. The MC stepped up, cleared his throat, and said, "Today we unveil a wall not of names, but of voices. These are the untold truths, the invisible soldiers." And one man reminded us of them all. He turned to me. "Sergeant Major Elijah Brooks, please come forward." I took the stage. Slow, cane in one hand, the other gripping the folded flag. I stood behind the mic and looked out at the young, the old, the ghosts in uniform. I was once blocked at a funeral I began, not because I hadn't earned my place, but because time made people forget that I had. I paused, letting silence speak louder than words. They said I didn't belong, that I wasn't on the list. But let me tell you, soldiers don't need permission to mourn each other. We carry every funeral in our bones. The crowd was still. Not a cough, not a breath out of place. You build monuments for the fallen, but you forget the living, the ones who came back, the ones who never came all the way back. I held up the photo of Walter and me. This man saved my life, and I saved his. But none of that was on a list. None of it made the paper. A breeze caught the flag in my hand, and I added, "We are not ghosts. We are not statistics. We are not done yet." When I stepped back, the applause wasn't loud. It was thunderous. Veterans rose to their feet. Young men wept. A group of bikers saluted with trembling hands. But what I'll never forget was the moment afterward. The wall behind me lit up not with names, but recordings. Faces. Voices. Old interviews. Shaky video footage from Vietnam, Iraq, Korea. And on that wall was Walter's voice. "Don't forget us," it said, tinny grainy. "Promise me you won't let them forget." I looked up, whispered I didn't Walt. I never did. The morning after the D.C. ceremony, I woke to a knock at the door that was neither timid nor forceful. It was official. When I opened it, a postal worker stood there, eyes wide as if he'd met a ghost. "Sergeant Major Brooks," he asked. "Depends who's asking." He handed me a thick envelope sealed with a golden insignia. "It's from the White House." I raised an eyebrow. Hope they're not asking me to run for office. I already fought enough battles. Inside was a letter, stamped, signed, heavy with regret. Dear Sergeant Major Brooks, on behalf of a grateful nation, we write to inform you that, after reviewing your record, we have discovered commendations that were delayed or never formally awarded. In light of recent attention brought to your distinguished service, the Department of Defense has decided to rectify this oversight. There was more. Details. A ceremony invitation. The words Medal of Valor stood in bold ink near the bottom. But none of that mattered more than the single sentence scribbled in pen at the very end. Thank you for reminding us of what we lost, and who we nearly forgot. No signature, just 4 hand-drawn stars. I didn't cry. Not yet. Not then. But when I placed the letter beside Walter's photo, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The ceremony was held at Fort Belvoir, smaller than the national spotlight of D.C., but somehow more sacred. Less cameras, more veterans. The kind of place where people stood when the flag moved and saluted, even when no one was watching. General Halley met me there. He looked proud, angry, grateful, all at once. You should have had this medal 50 years ago, he said. I shrugged. 50 years ago, I didn't have enough gray hair to earn sympathy. He smiled sadly. It's not sympathy. It's justice. And sometimes justice comes limping late but never lost. They called my name. I stepped forward as the room rose. Flags behind me. My knees ached, but my back stayed straight. When the medal was pinned to my chest, it didn't feel like a prize. It felt like a burden finally set down. Like Walter had been carrying part of me with him and was now giving it back. I saluted. Not for the generals, not for the crowd, but for every man who never got his medal, for the kid who died nameless, for the corpsmen with burnt hands, for the ones whose families never knew what they gave up. After the ceremony, a woman approached me in silence. She had silver hair, eyes like faded denim, and a scarf with military patches stitched into its fabric. Sergeant Major Brooks, she said softly. You knew my father, James Rivera. You carried him from the wreck. I froze. That name, that mission. It came back like fire smoke in my lungs, his blood on my hands. He didn't make it, I whispered. She nodded. But your story let me find him. After all these years. Thank you for letting me hear his voice in yours. She hugged me. It lasted longer than any applause I'd ever received. That night back home, I opened the last box I had ever promised myself I wouldn't touch. Inside, a blood-stained field map, a Zippo lighter engraved with one more day, and a sealed letter from Walter unopened since 1975. My hands shook as I broke the wax. Elijah, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. But I know you did. Because that's who you are. You carry people even when you're broken. You always said you were invisible. But brother, you are the man every soldier remembers. Promise me this, if the world forgets us, you won't. And if they block your way one day, kick the damn gate down. With all my love, Walter. I set the letter down, looked out into the darkness. Rest easy, Walt, I whispered. I didn't knock. I kicked. In the weeks that followed, the letters kept coming. The podcast had inspired chapters to spring up in every state. The gatekeepers were no longer just a movement, they were a force. Young soldiers wrote in asking for mentorship. Old ones called just to talk. Widows sent medals left behind by men who never came home. And I kept writing, kept speaking, kept remembering. Not for glory, not for revenge, but because someone had to. The gate they closed on me that day. It wasn't just a funeral gate. It was a gate of silence, of forgetting, of convenience. But now that gate was gone, blown off its hinges by truth, by memory, by love. The first time I ever saw a parade was in 1945. I was 7, sitting on my grandfather's shoulders as ticker tape rained down from the windows above Fifth Avenue. Victory in Europe had been declared, and every man, woman, and child in New York stood still to salute soldiers coming home. Even as a boy, I remember the sound, the clapping, the horns, the thunder of boots, and something else, respect. But over the years, parades changed. War changed. Respect changed. And somehow, we, the ones who came home, just faded. That's why what happened next caught me off guard. It started with a flyer, taped to my trailer's rusted mailbox, handwritten, smudged, and humble. Community Welcome Honoring, SGT, Major Brooks, Main Street, noon, Saturday. Bring a flag. Bring your family. Bring your story. The gatekeepers. I stared at it confused. I didn't ask for this. Didn't expect it. But part of me, long buried under years of silence, needed it. Saturday came fast. I dressed carefully, my uniform freshly pressed by Alan himself, who'd driven down with a smile and a 6-pack of root beer. He stood outside the trailer, pacing like a man about to give a best man speech. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I replied honestly. "But I'll march anyway." The moment I stepped outside, I froze. Main Street was packed. Flags. Children on shoulders. Bikers in leather vests. Mothers with gold star pins. Veterans' wheelchairs. Canes, scars, all of them. And at the front of the crowd, flanked by a column of soldiers in dress blues, stood General Halley. He didn't speak. He simply raised a hand. And the crowd parted, forming a long aisle down the center of the street. Alan whispered, "They want you to lead them." I blinked. Not march behind. Not sit in a seat. Lead. I took a step, then another. Cane tapping the concrete like a slow drumbeat. Behind me they followed, the parade that wasn't planned. The veterans they tried to forget. The families carrying photos instead of hands. The children waving flags for names they didn't yet understand. And as we moved, block by block, people stepped out of diners, barber shops, post offices. They clapped. They stood. At the town square, a stage had been built. Simple, wooden, unpainted. It reminded me of old mess hall platforms back when speeches were short and truths were long. I stepped up, faced the crowd. "I'm not a hero," I began. "I'm a survivor. But today, I march for the ones who never got to." I held up Walter's photo, now laminated and pinned to my uniform. This man saved me. I saved others. But the truth is, we saved each other. And now you saved me. The crowd was silent. Then someone began clapping. Then another. Soon it became a roar. After the crowd thinned and the music stopped, a small boy approached me. Maybe 10. Skinny arms. Big eyes. He handed me a drawing crayons on notebook paper. It was of me. Saluting, standing in front of a broken gate. "I saw your story," he said softly. My dad said I should thank you. I kneeled, slowly, took his hand and said, "You just did, son." That evening, I sat with Alan and General Halley on the porch of my trailer. The metal glinted from the sun as it dipped below the horizon. Funny thing, Halley said we tried for years to reach people about veteran issues, policy talks, op-eds. Nothing ever stuck. Alan nodded. And then one old man told the truth. No politics, No Polish. Just pain. I smiled. Pain, I said, is the one thing we all understand. Later that night, I received a call. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Sergeant Major Brooks, the voice said. Elderly. Female. Faint. Yes, ma'am. This is Patricia Shepard, Walter's sister. I straightened. I watched everything. The podcast, the speech, the parade. I just wanted to say, he always said you were his brother more than I was his sister. My eyes welled up again. She continued, I have something for you, something he left behind. May I come see you? My voice cracked. Yes, ma'am, any time. Before I slept, I looked out the window. The folded flag, the photo, the medal, and now drawings, letters, banners sent by children. I had spent decades believing I was forgotten. But the truth was this. I wasn't forgotten. I was waiting to be remembered. And now so were they all. She arrived the next morning. Patricia Shepard, tall, elegant in her old age with gray curls pinned neatly under a modest sun hat, and eyes that shimmered with quiet storms. When I opened the door, she smiled, and for a moment, it was like Walter was standing there again. The same eyes, the same steel in the spine, the same grief wrapped in grace. I'm sorry it took me so long, she said, her voice trembling. Walter never liked talking about the past, but after everything you've done, I realized. He wasn't staying quiet because of pain. He was waiting for you to speak first. She handed me a small box. Oak, polished, heavy. I found this in his desk, she whispered. It's yours. Inside was a medal, the Silver Star, but not just any medal. Engraved on the back were the words, to Elijah Brooks. You saved my life twice. This time it's mine to give back. There was a letter, too, folded, worn from years of waiting. Elijah, if this ever finds its way to you, it means the world's ready again. Ready to hear what it tried to forget. I didn't speak up, not because I was afraid, but because I knew I didn't have to. You were always the better voice, the clearer soul, the one who remembered not just the battles, but the boys who fought them. You once carried me through fire. Now, through your words, you've carried all of us. Don't stop. Keep the gate open for every last one of us still out there. With eternal respect, Walter. I didn't speak for a long time. I just stared at the medal, then at the folded flag, then at the names written on the wall of my memory. One by one, I whispered them aloud, as if calling roll, as if in that quiet corner of the world they could finally answer. In the months that followed, the gatekeepers grew into a nationwide organization. What began as a podcast became a network of support-free therapy mentorship legal advocacy for aging veterans. Every month in a different state they held what they called gate ceremonies, not funerals, but celebrations. No politics, no cameras, just honor. And always at the front was one empty chair, draped with a flag, facing the audience, reserved for whoever the world might have forgotten next. They called it Brooks's chair. I tried to refuse the name. They ignored me respectfully but completely. One day, I was invited to speak at West Point. I stood before 1,000 cadets, fresh-faced and stiff in their dress grays. I'm not here to talk about glory, I told them. I'm here to talk about after. About what happens when the war stops, but the silence begins. About the battles fought alone in the dark in nursing homes and under bridges. I let the silence sit with them. You want to lead men and women, don't just fight beside them, remember them. When the noise fades, when the uniform comes off, when they come home broken, or worse, ignored. The room stood in silence. And then they stood and saluted. I spent my final years not as a forgotten soldier, but as a keeper of stories, as a gate that stayed open. Children visited me, grandchildren of men I fought beside. Some brought photos, some brought medals, all brought love. One little girl named Ellie, 6 red hair missing front tooth, hugged my leg and said, "My mommy said you're the reason we still wave our flag." I laughed through tears. "No, sweetheart," I said, "you are." When I passed, they didn't bury me in silence. They held a ceremony in Arlington next to Walter. The president spoke. But it was Alan, older now, gray at the temples, who read my eulogy. He ended with my words, "We don't ask to be worshipped. We ask to be remembered. Not as heroes, but as humans who carried something heavy so others wouldn't have to." As the final salute cracked across the sky, a breeze stirred the flags around the rows of stones, and somewhere I could feel it. The gate was still open, not just for me, but for all of us, and it will never close again. Elijah Brooks was never after medals, applause, or headlines. All he wanted, what every soldier wants, was to be remembered. He stood at a gate meant to shut him out, and instead, he became the one who opened it for millions. This isn't just about one veteran. It's about every silent hero forgotten after the fight. It's about the wars that continue after the gunfire ends. The wars for respect, for dignity, for visibility. If you've ever felt invisible, if someone you love has been left behind by the system they served, let this story remind you. Your voice matters. Your memory matters. And you matter. If this story moved, you please subscribe to our channel for more real, powerful human stories. Comment below with the name of a veteran you honor today. Let's make sure none of them are forgotten. Share this video so Elijah Brooks's story can reach the people who need to hear it most. Because sometimes the loudest revolution begins with one old man who refused to walk away.